Welcome to Point Taken, the podcast for people who are either obsessed with Cedar Point or about to be. My name is Kate, I am your host, and welcome to our very first episode. I consider myself to be a Cedar Point local, someone who lives and breathes in the park, and like I said, this is the very first episode. I've always wanted to start a podcast, but I never knew what it would be about or what I could talk about and also be really passionate about until I came across the thought to do a specific Cedar Point podcast. Now, I've always been obsessed with amusement parks and theme parks, but I'm a local to Cedar Point. Now, I don't necessarily live right outside the gates of Cedar Point by any means, but I have pretty easy access to the parks, and I've gone there ever since I was a little kid. It's been an absolute blast. I've loved watching the park evolve throughout my lifetime, as well as seeing kind of the technology of the ride vehicles advance and also seeing what other parks are doing and things like that. Along with my obsession with Cedar Point, I'm also obsessed with things like Disney World, Disneyland, the differences between the two, as well as Universal Studios in Orlando. I have not been to Universal Studios in Hollywood yet, although I've been to like their city walk. I've not been to the actual park yet, but I'm hoping to go sometime in 2026. It is currently April of 2025, so we are coming up on the 2025 season of Cedar Point, and what better time to start a podcast than right now? So, my obsession with roller coasters started when I was really young. I've always been fascinated by amusement parks, kind of like what we just talked about, but specifically things like defunct attractions, understanding how they work from like a technological standpoint. And again, just the general progression of ride technology. Something that really got me interested was my fear of roller coasters. That probably comes as a surprise to you, but I was afraid of them because I wasn't sure if they were safe. And, you've heard the statistics that you're more likely to be injured on the way to the park or on the way home than you are to ever be injured on a roller coaster. And now there's really specific and niche data behind like you're more likely to get like bitten by a shark in your car on your way to the amusement park, just like stuff like that. And like I understood that it was safe, and I understood how many people ride rides every single year at parks around the world and how minimal accidents there are. And so I began to get interested in what accidents have happened on roller coasters and in theme parks, and how that has impacted the like further development of it all. And also just understanding the restraint system specifically in ride vehicles really helped me feel safe, and it was just a rabbit hole for me. The second that I started really going in depth about that stuff, I just fell in love and have been obsessed ever since. And I love talking about this stuff to my friends, and I've talked their ear off enough that that I'd like to talk to some other people about it as well. So if you enjoy coasters, if you're listening to this podcast right now, first off, thank you for being here. Secondly, you've probably heard of Cedar Point. The park has an admirable legacy. It is opening 155 years today. Well, sorry, let me say that again. This year will be 155 years of Cedar Point, which is absolutely insane to think about. It is one of the oldest amusement parks in the world. But yeah, there's lots of history, stories, as well as the monstrous collection of roller coasters that have broke so many records, and a lot of them are still standing today. So over the course of Point Taken, we're going to dive into a lot of fun topics that cover the history of the park, tips and tricks for traveling, and kind of getting the locals guide, like the behind the scenes, how to navigate the park like a local. As well as just like factual information that pertain to the amusement parks, but specifically talking about Cedar Point, Cedar Fair / the Six Flags kind of industry, because the merger just happened last July. So now Cedar Fair is now a part of the Six Flags, and they're seen as equals. But before I go down that rabbit hole, we're going to go down the rabbit hole that I planned for this episode. And by the way, if you see me kind of like darting my eyes around, it's because I have notes on my PC right underneath the camera. So Here's what you have to look forward today. Today we're talking about the Cedar Point history. Cedar Point opened in 1870. So we are going to be talking about the history from 1870 until the current time today, which again, this opening season is going to be 2025, which is 155 years of operation, which is absolutely insane. So, starting from the very beginning, Cedar Point began. It is located on a peninsula on Lake Erie. And if you don't know what a peninsula is, it's basically like an island, except only three sides are surrounded by water instead of all four. So Cedar Point is not technically an island, it is a peninsula, and you get on to, like, you can drive up Cedar Point. There's two different roads to go in and out. The first one is called the Causeway. That is probably what you have driven up and down if you've gone into Cedar Point. It's the Cedar Point Causeway. Something that I found really interesting is that Cedar Point opened in 1870, kind of like as a beach. Which we'll talk about here in a second, but it opened in 1870. But the causeway didn't open until 1914, and the chaussee didn't open until 1920, which is just so fascinating. Which means that in order to get to Cedar Point, people took a ferry, which you can still take a boat to Cedar Point. There's a pretty prominent marina, but it's just fascinating to me that there were not like public roads to get back into the beach like there are now. So anyways, it opened as a public beach in 1870. It featured local entertainment, the iconic Pavilion building, and eventually they started adding in amusement park rides. The Grand Pavilion there today, that is located on the east side of the park, up in the boardwalk area. The Grand Pavilion is inspired by the original pavilion that was there back in the 1800s. So Cedar Point was not always an amusement park, but it very quickly started building rides and kind of moving in that direction. And so the very first roller coaster that was built was the Switchback Railway. It was built in 1892 at a whopping 25 feet tall, and it went 10 miles an hour. And so this roller coaster is a down and back style coaster, which you go away from the station and then you come right back, similar to like Blue Streak. Blue Streak is considered to be a down and back coaster. And Blue Streak has like more hills and all of that stuff. You go down the big hill and you kind of go around and then you turn around and you come back, take some hills, and then you're back in the station. So most roller coasters are considered like a down and back style, but down and back typically refers to things like Switchback Railway and Blue Streak. So the very first roller coaster in the United States was also a switchback. However, it was built on Coney Island in 1884, 8 years before Switchback Railway. So the first one was on Coney Island, and then the second one was at Cedar Point. The thing that I find very interesting is that it did not have any sort of restraint system. It genuinely looked like a minecart on tracks with bunny hills. And looking at pictures of Switchback Railway today, like there's not a ton of them, but it's just really fascinating. And we'll like dive into this topic as we go through this entire season of Point Taken podcast. But the things that Cedar Point got away with back then would never fly today, and it is so fascinating to me. In terms of like specifically them not having restraints on their coasters. You didn't need them. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't there wasn't really a lot of danger just in general with the rides. And so anyways, I was saying it's fascinating to look back at the pictures because of what people were wearing to the parks. Today, when you go to amusement parks, most people have on like athletic clothes, light athletic clothes, tennis shoes. You see Crocs and slides and all of that fun stuff. But back then, people dressed a lot nicer than they do now. And so a lot of times you'll see people dressed up, lots of women in dresses and hats and men in suits. And so I just think it's really, really interesting that that's where it started off. So yeah, over the years, several attractions, hotels, and upgrades would be built, and some of them still stand today. Like, for example, the iconic Hotel Breakers. Hotel Breakers was built in 1905 and it still stands today. It opened with 600 rooms, making it one of the largest hotels in the US at the time. And it still stands today. It's right there on the peninsula on the northeast side. of Cedar Point. It is original. It is absolutely fascinating. Along with that, we have the Coliseum built on the Midway, and that was built in 1906, 1 year after Hotel Breakers. And this is where all of the arcade is. And so back then, it opened with some small rides, games, fortune tellers, merchandise, a skating rink, and even a grand ballroom. So, like I said, the Coliseum still exists today. It's on the Midway on the right side, just past Kitty Kingdom and the Carnival Games. So, if you're walking down the Midway, you see the sky buckets above you going, and to the left, you'll see the corral, which is like a food stop. There's like the corral and the Coca-Cola freestyle area. And then right across from it is where the Coliseum is. The upstairs still has the original ballroom, but it's not used publicly today. It was used a lot in the 1940s and the 1950s. I suspect that they use it for meetings and things like that, but it is not open to the public. And if you're interested in pictures of what that looks like, both back in the day as well as today, there are links in the description to find those photos. And by the way, there's going to be lots of resources down in the description if you'd like more information, more pictures, or just to know kind of where I'm getting my information from. Always check the description because there's lots of extra info down there. So, by the way, anyone else use Owala? Owala is my favorite water bottle. This is the third one I've purchased. I've broke a couple of them. Well, I broke one and I lost the others, but anyway. Anyway. Okay, so the next fun thing to talk about is in 1925. There was an event. It was called the Annual Convention of Lions International, held in the Convention Center, which the Convention Center is still open today, and there's a sign designating this event. In 1925, Helen Keller gave a speech at Cedar Point. And now I couldn't find a lot of information on like the logistics of how Helen Keller gave a speech, but I did find a transcript of what was said by Helen Keller. Again, I don't know what medium or anything like that because there just wasn't enough information on that. But yeah, in 1925, this is located back on, it's like midway through the park on the northeast side. Well, more of the eastern side, I guess. It's located by Windseeker in that picnic area by the East Beach entrance. The link to the speech is in the description below. Again, it's not like the actual speech or anything, but it is a transcript of the speech if you're interested in what she talked about. It's super fascinating. If you are ever in the parks and you see that building, it's a white building. There's a sign out front designating that she gave a speech at one point there in that building. I think it has her picture on it and maybe a couple of other facts. I'm really interested to go back and look at it once the park opens again for the 2025 season. But I'm not exactly sure what all that building is used for, but it's right next to like the pavilion picnic areas. And then the building to the left, I know that they do performances for high school, middle school band and orchestra events for their like music in the park stuff over the summer. But other than that, I'm not really sure what that space is used for. In 1946, the Midway Carousel opened up. And again, this still stands today. 1946. So this carousel is the carousel that you see right when you walk into the park. So you like scan your ticket, you walk in, and then you see the sign. Before it was the 150 sign, but I believe they're changing it going into this year. I think it's just gonna say like Cedar Point with like some sort of Six Flags logo icon on it. But right behind that is the Midway Carousel, and it has been open since 1946. It is a piece of absolute history, and you can tell that it's old and it's dated, but it's very cool. So there are instances of the Midway Carousel being haunted. I've heard lots of stories and I've read them online. People come into the park after hours to take care of things such as watering the flowers, groundskeeping, just cleaning up booths and things like that. And people have said that they have seen the carousel run backwards, which is again, completely fascinating, very surprising, very shocking. And even this last year at Halloween weekends, they intentionally ran it backwards, which I thought was really cool. I didn't get a chance to see it or experience it, but there are videos of that online. 1959 and 1969 were really important years for Cedar Point, because they opened things like the marina, which is one of the largest in the Great Lakes, Cadillac Cars, Scrambler, Tiki Twirl, Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad, Turnpike Cars, Cedar Downs Racing Derby, the Live Entertainment Department, Frontier Town, and Cedar Creek Mine Ride. And hopefully you noticed a theme with all of these. They are still open and functioning in the park today. I did make a mistake. I don't know if you're yelling at me or not. One of them is not open anymore. I believe it is the Turnpike Cars. I put that in the list, forgetting that Turnpike Cars is no longer an attraction at Cedar Point. It is now defunct. It is now the Farmhouse Restaurant back in Frontierland. But other than that, all of these attractions, openings, things are still functioning today at the parks, which is so cool that they have stood the test of time, especially the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad. There's just something about having that ride go through the park. You sit on the train, go through Bonesville. It's been there forever. And also just the smell of the stuff that they put in it to make it run. I don't know what it's called. Is it coal? I don't know. But the smell of the trains is very, very nostalgic. So there are a lot of other notable attractions that you hear about when you talk about the history of Cedar Point, so I wanted to talk about them a little bit. I have not experienced most of these, some of these, but when you talk to people who are older who experienced Cedar Point during this time period, they like to bring up these things. So for example, the first one, Earthquake. Earthquake was a ride. I don't really know too much about it, but it took place where it is now Snoopy Boutique and the Sweet Spot stores over on the Midway. Previously, I thought that it belonged in the Coliseum, but I was wrong. The Coliseum did not host it, but it is right next to the Coliseum, right past those restrooms there. Next up is Space Spiral. Space Spirals functioned from 1965 all the way up until 2012. It was somewhere around 300 feet tall, and it was just like an observation deck. It was taken down in 2012 so that Gatekeeper could be built in 2013. Along with that, in space that they took down to make room for Gatekeeper was the beloved Disaster Transport. Disaster Transport opened in 1990 and functioned all the way until 2012. It was a covered bobsled roller coaster. It has a lot of appeal to it. Disaster Transport in general has a lot of history that I will probably go over in a future episode. But it was just such a beloved roller coaster, and a lot of people have fond feelings when they think about Disaster Transport. One of the best parts about the ride, though, had nothing to do with the ride in itself. Ohio summers get really hot, and it was a building where you could go in and get a break from the sun, experience the AC, and go ride the ride. So that was always really nice. There were spots in the ride, though, where you were outside. There were like tunnels that would go around the outside of like the main building, and those would be hot just because it would like get the sun on it and stuff. But other than that, the AC was fantastic. Another really important beloved ride is Pirate Ride. This was open from 1966 into 1996 is when they took it down. It functioned right beside Mill Race, and it was outside of like where Blue Streak is. So if you're walking back towards Blue Streak, it'd be on the left where the Chicky and Pete's restaurant is right now. Chicky and Pete's did not open last year for some reason. We're not really sure why or what the future of Chicky and Pete's is, but that is where Pirate Ride was. And I believe I have heard rumors that if you look in certain areas, you can still see tire marks from where the ride did run at one point. Western Cruise was open in 1964. I don't have dates on when Western Cruise was no longer functioning. And there's also not a ton of information or on ride footage of Western Cruise, and I've always been really fascinated by it because I remember experiencing it as a kid, but I don't ever get to see information about it. There's not a lot of artifact, especially online, on what this ride was, this attraction. It basically, what it would do is ride the boat around what I call Millennium Island. It's basically the island right in the middle of the park where a lot of the track for Millennium Force kind of sits on. A lot of people also call it Adventure Island because it was home to the Forbidden Frontier, and all of that fun stuff. But anyways, it would go around in that river, and there were like different kinds of things to look at on the side. So again, I don't know what date that ended, but it eventually turned into Snake River Expedition, which is kind of Cedar Point's take on Jungle Cruise, where it was live actors, you were on a boat, and there was like some sort of storyline where you had to get gold and take it somewhere, and we ended up getting boarded by people who were trying to take the gold, and we like switched them out and actually gave them bombs. I don't know exactly. I've only ridden it once, but that attraction is also defunct as of last season was the first season that was not running. Along with that, this is a fact that a lot of people do not know. Cedar Point used to be home to a safari. Yes, it was called Jungle Larry's African Safari that opened in 1965 and functioned until 1994. And there's not I haven't found information on exactly where it was in the park. However, there is a sign similar to the Helen Keller sign that is over by Windseeker. There is a sign noting Jungle Larry's African Safari, and it is located outside of the Top Thrill 2 gift shop. I believe that building was one of the prominent parts of the safari there, but Cedar Point used to house animals such as giraffes and elephants specifically. I'm not sure exactly what else, but there were other animals in the safari. I think I read that there was a lion tiger mix, and I don't really know the details about keeping animals on Lake Erie, but that's probably why it doesn't exist anymore today. The last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of like notable defunct attractions are Shoot the Rapids. Shoot the Rapids took place, was built in 1968 until 2013. Unfortunately, there was an accident that took place on that roller coaster, which closed it forever. Well, it's not really a roller coaster. It was more of like a log flume ride with like over the shoulder restraints. And so, there was some sort of malfunction and the ride flipped over and people were stuck with the over the shoulder restraints with their heads underwater. Luckily, bystanders were able to actually jump into the water and flip the boat over, but it was very scary. I believe there's footage of not the ride actually flipping, but the rescue efforts into Shoot the Rapids. So that accident did close that ride down forever. Shoot the Rapids turned into the Forbidden Frontier on Adventure Island and Professor Delbert's Frontier Fling. Professor Delbert is a character from the Western Cruise. You can see him now posed in front of the area by the Coke refresh station in the 2024 season. We'll see if he's still there in the 2025 season because they are taking out the Frontier Fling. It is now a defunct attraction, and we're waiting for an announcement in the coming seasons as to what is going to go there next. I hope you're enjoying all of this information about Cedar Point. We're going to take a quick break from the history to do a pet peeve pit stop. Like I said, I'm a local. I've grown up going to Cedar Point. I have a lot of pet peeves of just roller coaster / theme park etiquette. And so this one is very niche, and I'm starting off with this one in the season of Point Taken podcast because it is such a niche. Cedar Point, you would not have this pet peeve unless you went there as many times as I did. So here is my pet peeve pit stop. When people are at the Coca-Cola Freestyle machines, so you can get a pass that lets you fill up a cup of any drink from the freestyle machines every 15 minutes. And it's really nice to have, especially in the hot weather. They have things like Gatorade, Powerade, Sprite, Coke, all of the stuff that you could get normally in a freestyle machine. And what I will see people do is take their cup and they will put it into the machine to get ice. and they shake it and they look at it and they dump out some ice, not all of it though, just dump it. And then they look at it again and realize that they dumped too much out, and then they get more ice. That is a pet peeve of mine for two reasons. Number one, because when you have why are you dumping out the ice just to put more ice into the cup? That doesn't make sense to me. Just get the amount of ice that you want. Number two, by the time that it gets like 5, 6, 7 o'clock p.m. in the parks, you'll notice that the freestyle machines will have ice piled up on the grate, and it just sits there. And then you go to get ice yourself at the end of the day when you're like really thirsty, whatever, it's time to like take a break. There's never any ice in the machines, ever. And it is so frustrating because the drinks in the machine, they don't come out cold. They come out like not warm, but they're not cold either. And especially when it's like mid-July, 80 degrees and the sun's going down, you want that ice. And none of the machines have it ever. And it is so frustrating because if we all just did our part and just got the ice the way that you want to get the ice, you can take as much as you want. Just don't dump it out and then get more ice. That shit's ridiculous, and it drives me bonkers, and I can't stand seeing it. And now that I've pointed it out, I'm sure that you will notice it too. So that is my pet peeve pit stop for the day. Next up, our segment is Cedar Secrets. And so since we are getting ready to go into the 2025 season, I have so many tips on Cedar Point, and I would also love to hear your questions if you're planning a trip for the summer or for the fall for Halloween weekends. I'd also love to hear your stories about Cedar Point. If you have any stories about the beginning history of Cedar Point, or literally anything, whatever you would like to share about Cedar Point, I am all ears. I will be reading the comments. I will be responding to comments. So feel free to share your part. Anyways, Cedar Secrets is basically how to strategize your day as a local. If you're planning to visit, you're probably going to want to do the big stuff. And so it's overwhelming to think about how to get through the park. Specifically for the 2025 season, we are looking forward to the grand opening of Top Thrill 2. Hopefully it will be open longer than 7 operating days this season. We're also looking forward to Siren's Curse, which is the brand new tilt coaster that is being built. But along with that, Cedar Point has so many giants when it comes to the coaster world. Lots of record-breaking coasters that are fun to ride over and over again, such as Steel Vengeance, which we lovingly call Steve, Millennium Force, which we lovingly call Millie, Maverick, we just call it Maverick, Gatekeeper, Valraven, Magnum, even Gemini. There's a lot of really amazing roller coasters, and so it can be a little overwhelming to figure out exactly how you're going to attack your day. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably someone who likes to plan out your day and have some sort of strategy. So I got you. I'm going to tell you what my strategy would be. You always want to arrive early. You want to be in the park, like at the gate to scan your ticket, or if they let you scan your ticket, to be inside the park by 9:30, 9:45. The line gets very long at opening, and the further you are to the front, the better. The park opens for the day at 10 a.m. every day that it's open throughout the operating season. And then what you're going to do is head right back to the back of the park. You're going to be really tempted to jump on rides such as Raptor or check out Gatekeeper, those rides that are right there in the front. It's going to say that it's going to be a short wait, but it's going to be even longer because they haven't had a chance to like update the ride time for that, the wait time for what that's going to be. And so you're going to want to beat all of those people and go right to the back of the park. Rides like Steel Vengeance and Millennium Force are going to be busy all day, so it's best to hit those first. Same with Maverick. So you're going to want to go back and you're going to stick to the left every single time that there's a fork. And I would honestly go past Millennium Force and go straight to Steel Vengeance. If you go all the way back to Steel Vengeance or any of these rides and one of them are not open yet, probably Steel Vengeance because sometimes it takes a little bit of coaxing to get running in the morning. Go back to Millennium and try coming back to Steel Vengeance once you're done. And while you're back there, you can also hit Maverick. Maverick tends to have a pretty big line. But sticking to the back left, the northwest side of the park is your best bet. There's a lot more to do on the west side of the park than there is on the east side of the park. And it's best to just stick to the back. So with that being said, here's another little Cedar secret that I have for you with Maverick. Maverick is a great ride. It is super fun. It is super fast. It is low to the ground. If the inside queue, like the covered part of the queue, is full but not to the path, it's an hour wait. If the path extends like beyond the inside area and into the path, but not in the outside queue, it's an hour and a half. And if it extends into the outside queue, you're going to be waiting 2 hours plus, no matter what the sign says, every time. That's as long as the ride doesn't go down. So that's a little tip. It's really nice because there's a lot of area where you can walk by Maverick before you can actually see what the sign is, and you can kind of gauge what the wait's going to be before you get all the way over to the guest entrance. So that is my Cedar secret for the day. Jumping back into the legacy of Cedar Point. So Cedar Point's always had a unique legacy, and its history and the evolution is fascinating. So we talked about that time between the, I believe it was 1959 to 1969, where I named off all of those attractions that were built in that time that are still standing today. Cedar Point risked being removed in the 1950s to become a housing development. Could you imagine if the Cedar Point we know and love today was a housing development? It's such beautiful land and such a unique space. Like people really realized that we were sitting on a gold mine with Cedar Point, and they ended up taking full advantage of that when the public saved it. So when they saved the park and they decided to keep on going with Cedar Point with their amusement park ideas, they really pushed to become the Disneyland of the Midwest, which resulted in all of those attractions opening in the 1950s and the 1960s. The attractions that I named were not the only attractions that were opened and like the things that were prominent. I just wanted to name the things that are still existing today from that time period. Cedar Point is truly a time capsule. It is truly so fascinating. I know I keep saying that, but I just love like learning and talking about it. I'm sure you can tell. So with Cedar Point being the Disneyland of the Midwest, Pirate Ride was the closest Disney-esque attraction we've ever seen at Cedar Point. And it kind of is like a sit down in like a boat with wheels, and you just kind of look at all of the different scenes. There were lots of animatronic pirates throughout the ride. And you kind of see rides like that from that same time period at Disneyland, especially in California, but also in Disney World in Orlando. You see those kind of rides, but that is like the one and only ride that has been like that at Cedar Point. So at first, the park built attractions to make money and grow, but soon after, Cedar Point was after the records. They wanted to be the tallest, the fastest, the steepest, and to become like a vacation destination for people all over the world. And we will talk about that more later when we talk about the Coaster Wars, which is coming. I believe that's episode 3 of this podcast. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. So before we talk about the Coaster Wars briefly, we're going to talk about Cedar Creek Mine Ride. So this opened in 1969. Cedar Creek Mine Ride operated in 1969 and still operates today. And it was one of the first roller coasters to utilize steel tubular track. What? Steel tubular track. The track that we use permanently now, almost permanently for roller coasters. The very first was the Matterhorn bobsleds over in Disneyland in California, and that also still functions today. But the Matterhorn was the very first, and Cedar Creek Mine Ride was the second, which is crazy. Cedar Creek Mine Ride is the second oldest coaster in the park behind Blue Streak, and it is one of 2 rides to feature 2 lift hills. Notice I said lift hills. The other one is Iron Dragon. Maverick doesn't have lift hills. It has 2 launches, so I don't necessarily count Maverick, but it is one of 2 in the park with lift hills. So with that, we're going to hop into a brief summary of the Coaster Wars. And again, if you like this snippet, stay tuned for episode 3, where we are going to dive into the Coaster Wars. And trust me, it is fantastic to look at the legacy of Dick Kinzel, the former president and CEO of Cedar Point / Cedar Fair / Valley Fair. That really plays a huge part into the legacy of Cedar Point and what Cedar Point has become. So in 1989, Cedar Point started what is known as the Coaster Wars by building Magnum XL 200. In short, the Coaster Wars, Cedar Point was in competition with every other amusement park to create the tallest, fastest, record-breaking coaster. The most notable record was the world's tallest coaster, which at the time of the debut belonged to Magnum XL 200 as the first hypercoaster, which is the first coaster to be above 200 feet. Hypercoaster refers to anything in the 200 to 300 height range. The first Giga Coaster, Millennium Force, which refers to coasters between 300 and 400 feet, as well as the first Strata Coaster, which you probably guessed it, Top Thrill Dragster, which is between 400 and 500 feet. So Cedar Point has the first Hyper, Giga, and Strata Coaster, all 3 of which are still standing today and can be rode today, which is, well, not today, but during the season, which is just so cool. So Top Thrill Dragster has been reimagined as Top Thrill 2, and as of this last winter, Kingda Ka has been demolished, has been demoed, which means that Top Thrill 2 holds the record for the world's tallest roller coaster at 420 feet, and it was the construction was completed to build Top Thrill Dragster in 2002, and then 2 years after Top Thrill Dragster was built, Kingda Ka was built at 456 feet, breaking the record for the world's tallest coaster. So Top Thrill 2, I keep calling it Top Thrill 2 because that's what it's called now. Top Thrill Dragster was built in 2002, 420 feet, world's tallest coaster. 2 years later, we got Kingda Ka at 456 feet, but now that Kingda Ka has been demoed, Top Thrill 2 now stands as the tallest roller coaster in the world here at Cedar Point in Lake Erie. Wow, I sound like an advertisement. Holy moly. Hopefully this is getting you excited for the season. And if the season has already been in full force, full swing by the time you're listening to this, hopefully it's getting you excited for your next trip. So that has been a generic history of Cedar Point since 1870, starting off as essentially beaches with bathhouses and small little amusement park rides here and there, such as Switchback Railway and some swings in the water, has become full force into one of the greatest roller coaster theme parks, roller coaster amusement parks in the world. It is a giant in the Cedar Fair / Six Flags Corporation, and the history, the time capsule, just all of the things that go into what makes Cedar Point is fascinating, not even mentioning the fact that you see timelines of actual roller coaster manufacturers grow through the park. For example, let me explain. B&M. There are several B&M roller coasters at Cedar Point, and you can kind of see how technology has developed through the years. So the first one was built, I don't know the year off the top of my head. I think it was the 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s. Raptor was built. That is a B&M coaster. And then in 2013, we got Gatekeeper, also a B&M roller coaster. And then in 2016, just 3 years later, we got Valraven, which is also another B&M coaster. Along with that, we have Aero Developments or Aerodynamics. They built things like Gemini and Magnum XL, as well as some other things in the park, and it's just really cool to see how the technology has developed. So all of that to say, Cedar Point is one of the greatest parks in the world, with many historic record-breaking coasters that are still standing today. Don't be greedy with your ice, and make sure to stay tuned for the next episode. Season 1 of Point Taken is 5 episodes long. This is episode 1. Episode 2 will be local tips and tricks on how to plan your vacation from a local's perspective, someone who spends a lot of time here. And trust me, you're going to want my perspective, because if you're spending all of this money to come on out to Ohio, come on out to Sandusky, Ohio, you're going to want to do it the right way, especially because there are so many coasters and so many things to do. Let me help you. Let me be your guide. That will be the next episode. If you like this episode, don't forget to like. It is free. Drop me a follow, subscribe, do all of the things that you can do on this platform, whatever one you are listening to it on. Also, make sure to check out my other social media. I stream weekly on Twitch on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the time of recording this. The links to all of my social media, as well as resources I use, are in the description, as well as my personal website, my Ko-fi, my TikTok, and my Twitch. And I really hope to see you over there. Don't forget to tell me about your favorite Cedar Point memory in the comments, and I will see you real soon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Point Taken with Kate. Point Taken and the Cedar Point Podcast.